So, what happens when a country's big push for military self-sufficiency runs head-on into calls for public accountability? Well, today we're taking a look inside a really powerful and kind of secretive organization at the very heart of Pakistan's defense world, the Directorate General of Munitions Production, or DGMP for short. Okay, so what is the DGMP, really? The easiest way to think about it is as the central nervous system for all of Pakistan's military gear. I mean, this is the government body that's in charge of what gets built, what gets bought, and ultimately what ends up in the hands of the country's armed forces. And that question right there, it gets us to the first part of this story. The official version. How does an organization with this much power and influence want to be seen by the rest of the world? To really get what the DGMP is all about, you have to start with its core mission. And trust me, this isn't just about buying and selling weapons. It's a mission that's deeply tied to national pride and, maybe most importantly, strategic independence. What's so fascinating to me here is the language they use. National self-reliance, mitigate dependency. This is the kind of talk you hear from a country that is absolutely determined to stand on its own 2 feet, especially in a pretty tough part of the world. It's a strategy that basically says, nope, we're not going to be dependent on foreign suppliers for our own security. All right, so that's the mission statement on paper. But how does that actually translate into real-world hardware and, global ambition? Let's take a look at what they've been building. A perfect example of this whole mission in action is the Harba missile. Now, this isn't some knockoff or a reverse-engineered copy. It is a really sophisticated cruise missile that was developed right there in Pakistan. It can take out ships, it can hit targets on land. It's a real, tangible symbol of the country's growing tech skills. And this is where it gets really interesting, because their ambition isn't just about defending themselves. It's about becoming a serious player in the global arms market. It's about turning that domestic know-how into international influence and, of course, cash. But, and this is a big but, that story of homegrown success and national pride, it's not the whole picture. Not even close. Because while the DGMP was busy building missiles, another part of the government was looking into its finances. And what they found completely changed the conversation. And here it is, the turning point. This official audit report from Pakistan's own government just blew the lid off the official story. Suddenly, the headlines shifted from industrial success to some really tough questions about financial accountability. Now, just look at this timeline for a second. It's pretty telling. In 2020, the DGMP gets more freedom, more autonomy. Then, just 2 years later, it's at the center of this huge financial investigation, with all its internal business suddenly under a very bright, very public spotlight. The audit report was, well, a bombshell. It flagged financial problems adding up to over 21.4 billion Pakistani rupees. I mean, just let that number sink in. That is a staggering amount of money, no matter how you slice it. And that was just the start. And if you thought that was it, nope. The report also pointed out a whole separate batch of irregularities worth $243 million US. When you put it all together, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in spending that's now being questioned. The audit didn't just deal in these huge abstract numbers. It really got into the weeds. It pointed to specific problems, like over 93 million rupees paid out for special allowances that were never even properly approved. That kind of thing suggests a much bigger systemic issue with how things are run. But honestly, here's the real kicker. It wasn't just about the money that was unaccounted for. It was about the missing paperwork. The auditors basically said they couldn't even verify the spending because the DGMP just didn't provide the documents they needed. This goes way beyond sloppy bookkeeping. It points to a serious lack of transparency. So what we're left with are two completely different, totally conflicting stories about the very same organization all happening at the exact same time. It's like you have these two parallel universes. On one side, you've got the official story, right? The DGMP as a strategic national asset, the engine of self-reliance, a symbol of technological pride. And then, on the other side, you have the official public record from the nation's own watchdog, painting a picture of huge financial problems and a serious lack of transparency. And all of this brings us to a really fundamental question, one that pretty much every country has to wrestle with. How do you balance the very real need for secrecy when it comes to national defense with the absolute non-negotiable demand for public accountability?
The story of the DGMP really shows you just how high the stakes are when that balance gets thrown off.